What is the difference between coaching or preparing someone for an amateur fight versus a professional boxing fight? And some other questions with that, guys. Hey, guys, this is Coach Keith Keppner. Why should you listen to me? I've been coaching professional amateur boxing for going on about 15 years now. I was mentored by my father, who's a professional boxing coach. I boxed under him in the United States and Mexico. And my father was mentored as a coach and coached as a fighter under Chuck Bodak. And Bodak worked with over 50 world champions, and he was the Olympic coach for Muhammad Ali. Bowie559 had a question on one of my latest videos saying what's the difference between coaching amateur and professional boxers, and then how many fights to go pro. So let's start off with the how many fights to go pro first, and then we'll dive deep into this question. Great question. How many fights before you go pro? Well, everyone could show me examples of guys that had no fights before they went pro, or just a few fights, 5, 10, barely anything, and were successful. But the preponderance of the evidence suggests that you should get a good amount of amateur fights before going pro, because you remember those people, because those are the outliers. And with everything, there are outliers. You want to look at what most people do, and if you judge off of that, then you're more likely to be successful. If you count on being that person that wins the lottery, well, the odds are not in your favor at all. We want to stack the odds in our favor as much as possible, while also putting in an extraordinary amount of effort, while putting in a uncommon amount of effort, and then pursuing things in a way that are the highest leveraged ways to be successful. So when I first started coaching boxing, about 2010, 11, right after I stopped boxing, I tried to help a couple guys out that had got into pro boxing the wrong way. They had one fight, one had no fights, one had a couple fights, and then turned pro right away. They turned pro right away because somebody told them they could make some money, make $800 back then, $1,200, and they were obviously being sold on that to just be an opponent. They also wrongly judged their ability, and that goes back to that thing I mentioned before, the bias of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the less you know about something, the more you overestimate your ability. And the more you know about something, you tend to less estimate your ability, or it's more realistic. You see this all the time with the comment sections on boxing videos like mine, where people that have just been doing boxing a little bit or for a little bit of time, or like I've mentioned in my other videos, been doing their first 6 months for the next 6 years, they think they know something. They do know something, but they don't know enough to know where they're wrong. And so they overestimate their abilities and come up short. Guys like this, they'll spar against a professional fighter, and the professional fighter is just sparring. Sparring is different than fighting, even if you spar hard, because any fighter I have that is going to fight has to be able to spar hard. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole, and I've done some videos on that. We can talk about that. But it's different. So sparring hard is different than fighting. It's not the same thing. There's a different pressure that gets created. And then also there's a thing, I was talking to someone about this the other day, where if you want to get a fight with somebody, let's say you're a pro fighter, you want to get a fight with an opponent that is in your area, you might spar with them. Now, what are you going to do when you spar them? Are you going to beat the living crap out of them? Or are you going to not do too much? Are you maybe going to purposely maybe do not so good? Why? Because you're actually really good, and you can beat the hell out of them, because you're targeting to set them up. Because hey, if Bob gets in the ring with me and I beat the hell out of Bob, and then a couple months later I ask Bob to fight me, or my manager asks Bob to fight me, Bob's not going to want to fight me. But if I get in the ring with Bob and I just kind of sit back, don't do too much, don't have pop on my punches, don't put my punches together, don't put any pressure on them, don't counter very well, things like that, maybe let a couple shots slide through here and there, then Bob's like, damn, Keith's not that good. So then a couple months later, when my manager asks Bob, hey, you want to fight Keith for some money? Bob's like, oh, hell yeah, dude. I'll beat the hell out of that guy. And that's a setup. And I've seen that setup actually happen, just like that. So do not overestimate your ability by only how you perform in sparring. But sparring is a gauge. It is a meter. If you don't do well in sparring against people, that's a sign, but it's not your only sign. And the other thing comes with experience. Having about Anywhere from 30 to 50 amateur fights is a good level or metric, in my opinion. Now, if you started boxing since you were 8 years old and you started fighting when you were 8, that number is not going to be that number. That number is going to be a lot bigger. It's going to be probably 100, because obviously you started boxing early and you had a lot of fights as a JO, and that just is what it is. But what I've seen time and time again is that a lot of those fights as JOs, you learn some things. You learn the pressure of competition, things like that. But I had one guy that came out to me from California, and he had like 15 or something JO fights when he was like 10, 11 years old or something like that. And they didn't box for a while. And then he went back to fighting, moved out to the East Coast and started training with me. And I had him fight. And me being a coach at the time, or a newer coach at the time, meaning I was like maybe like 5 years into it, I was like, man, I really want to make sure I dot all my I's and cross all my T's. So I was like, let me make sure I tell the Amateur Boxing Commission that Jesus has fights in California, right? Let me be up and up. And I thought I was doing the right thing. But what I recommend for you to maybe do is just, if your guy hasn't been boxing for 10 years and there was no record of Jesus having those fights and stuff like that, because it was just back then, especially, maybe it was different. It was a little bit maybe easier for stuff like that to fly under the radar. I really wish I wouldn't have mentioned it, because those fights at 10 years old, he didn't really gain that much. So then automatically he goes into, at the time open division was different than novice, and he goes into open division, and he's going against these open guys that have been, fighting consistently and have, deca amount of fights. And he did okay, but if he could have got a chance to just go back to be a novice and fight 0 to 10 fight guys, it would have been a different story. So anyway, about 30 to 50 fights as an amateur. Now, why is that important? Besides learning the art of boxing and knowing how to perform under pressure and all those things that are essential for becoming a good boxer, it's also important because now you know what styles you do well against, what styles you have trouble with. And that allows a manager to move your career better, and a coach, and yourself. You know that if you do really well against a certain type of fighter and you have what seems like a 50-50 fight, but you do really well against that type of fighter, like legitimately, and you've shown that in competition, meaning you beat the hell out of that type of fighter, okay, hey, this 50-50 shot, let's take it, because it's actually a 60-40 in your favor. But if you don't have the amateur experience, you only have 5, 10 fights or whatever, you really don't know. And so therefore you go in the ring and you think, oh, I do well against that type of guy, but you really don't. And then that guy you're going against has a bunch of ring experience, so he's used to the pressure, he's used to all these things, and he's used to your style, and he knows he can beat your style real well. So that's some things to consider. There's more things to consider, but that's just the cliff notes. Now let's go into amateur versus pro with coaching, meaning like I assume the question means like preparation for a fight, so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about in a sense. We're going to start from least consequential to most consequential, okay? So least consequential, but still consequential, is the equipment. So you have the glove size is different. In the States, we still use helmets. I know I talk to everyone and coach guys around the world with the custom program that I do, where I create training programs for them and review videos of their training, of their fights, of their sparring, and everything else. And a lot of those guys have had a lot of massive success. And none of them wear helmets. And I wish we were back to that in the States. Because helmets suck. And all my guys wear helmets for sparring. And the amateurs here in the States, if you're on the local state level, you have to wear helmets and things like that. I know the elite competition, some of the tournaments, they're not wearing helmets. But a lot of those tournaments, they are wearing helmets. Still in the States. Let's get rid of those helmets. Okay? So that's one thing that's different. But one thing that changes is that you have these guys brought up on this amateur system where everyone's wearing helmets, so people are always jabbing right for the forehead or shooting hard shots right for the forehead instead of for the soft tissues, because there's a padding on the forehead. And when you have a glove on and you have a forehead and you have a guy with a thick skull and you're punching his skull as hard as you can over many rounds, you're going to hurt your hand versus being more precise. And that leads to other things as well that I'll wrap back around to. And then you have the glove size. So the amateurs, you have a little bit bigger glove. So again, bigger glove plus sometimes a helmet, depending where you are in the world. Then you're able to punch those areas and it not be such a big deal, versus if you punch a guy really hard with a smaller glove and right on the forehead, it can bother you. It can hurt if you're not prepared for it. But also you need to aim for just more soft tissues and more beneficial areas to hit. Then with the glove size, there also becomes theoretically more power generation, and you're allowed more wrap, so you're able to really prime yourself to hit hard, but also you need to learn how to hit hard as well. And we'll get into that in a moment. Before we do, though, we're going to talk about length. All right, so that's something as well, that the length of the time, obviously, you need to train for and prepare for. A pro fighter, their first pro fight, generally, is going to be 4 rounds. Some guys, their first pro fight was 6 rounds, but generally it's going to be 4. So you're fighting about 1 more round, and assuming that you've fought the right amount of amateur fights, you'll be fighting 3 round of 3 minutes with a minute break. So that's close, but you're adding a minute. You're adding a round, rather, 4. And then, of course, if we're talking further down the line with 8-round fights, obviously 10, and then obviously 12-round fights, the picture starts to change a little bit. But even in a 4-round fight, the picture starts to change as well. Definitely within, when we go into the 6 territory and the 8 territory, it does significantly change. How does it change? Pacing becomes more important. So think about it. If you're a boxer, whatever level of boxer you're at right now, and you have to go against an unschooled guy that's strong and in shape, the strong and in shape unschooled guy could, not always, but could give you some problems if the round is a minute, or if the round is 30 seconds, or if the round is 20 seconds. The shorter you have in the ring with them, the more they're just able to use their athleticism and scrappiness to deal with you and to give you trouble. And the longer it draws out, the more you're able to give them trouble. So it's very important and very powerful. So what you have to remember when you're an amateur is, I believe, train with the end in mind, okay? So it doesn't mean you don't learn how to fight within the amateur system and still be a winner and things like that. But call me biased as a pro coach, but the antithesis of boxing to me is pro boxing. And that's where my focus is learning how to hit properly, to do all things that define pro boxing. If you learn to just simply move and touch and move and kind of fencer style boxing, you can win a ton of amateur fights, and that's great, and I'm not downing on it at all. And you can transfer a lot of that to pros, but there are some things that represent your shift over from amateur to pro that are very important. What I see a lot of times that happens is these amateur guys will get away with having their chin up in the air. Their chin will be up in the air. There's a guy recently, I just think about this in the past couple of years. Amateur, the chin is really up in the air, and because there's only 3 rounds, it doesn't get tested. The guy doesn't have a chance to start breaking him down and getting close enough to set up the shot or to land the shots that are going to be there. And since it's only 3 rounds, he can get away with his feet and everything else, and he's fine. But then when he made the transition to pro, he has a lot of trouble now and is getting nailed, because even though he's a top-level amateur, because he doesn't have some of those foundational pieces that I think he needs to develop going on to pro. Now, he's working on those things, and maybe he'll develop those things, and I hope he does. But that's a challenge. There's this idea of that, hey, this guy didn't make a transition from amateur to pro. He didn't make the transition. They're different. Now, the length is obviously different, so therefore when you're training, you prepare for more length. When you spar, you're not going to be sparring 3 and 4 rounds like you would more so as an amateur. You're going to be sparring more 6, 8 rounds to prepare for 6 or 8 rounds. Now, of course, there's an idea that if you're fighting a 10-round fight, doesn't necessarily mean you need to spar 10 rounds. But I do think it is important for a guy that's never done 10 rounds to spar 10 rounds, to know that you've done it, and to have that mental confidence. And that doesn't necessarily mean 10 hard rounds, but I do think that's important. I know that some people would disagree with me that in preparation for a 10-round fight, you would only maybe spar 6 rounds, 8 rounds. And it's similar to building up to a distance for like a mile pace, where if you're getting ready to run, let's say a half marathon, like I've ran quite a few, where my first time running a half marathon, I didn't ever actually run the 3.1 before I ran the half marathon. I did like max, I think like 10 or 11, like right below it, and then so that I could peak at that time. But I think it is important though for guys to just have that familiarity, because a lot of it is it's not necessarily a conditioning thing. You know, it is in a way, but it's a mental focus thing. Like a lot of times, I know the guys that I have, as I build them up and they start getting more and more work in with pros, they talk about the level of focus, and they can keep their focus, the amateur, for that 3 rounds or maybe 4 rounds, but then they they lose focus maybe in the 6th round and they get caught by something, and they don't get hurt, but they get clipped, and they're like, damn, I lost focus for a second. They haven't maintained that focus for that longer stretch of time, which is an important factor, obviously, because if you lose focus for a moment in that ring, it's going to be trouble. All right. And then the last thing is we have to remember that the scoring systems are different. So, in a way, amateur boxing and professional boxing are still, they didn't used to be, but are still right now and have been for decades, 2 different sports. So, if you play, from my understanding, football as an amateur or in the college level, and you do a touchdown, that's a touchdown. I'm not real versed on football at all, but that's the same thing. If you're playing amateur soccer and you kick the ball in the goal of your opposing team, that's a goal. And that equates to the same thing, whether you're professional, amateur, whatever. In boxing, we don't have that luxury. We used to. When my dad fought amateur in Chicago, it was the same scoring system, and that scoring system was clean, effective punches. But that's been changed for many decades, and it has affected, I think, the sport negatively. And it doesn't probably prepare guys, and that's where it didn't used to be a discussion so much of, hey, this great amateur didn't make the transition to pros. There was the focus element I talked about. There was the length element of rounds, being able to keep their composure throughout those rounds, because those are all factors that get revealed. Some guys, they just mentally or physically are just built to just be a little bit better for the shorter distance, and other guys are able to grow in or stretch out their time or don't turn on sometimes until later in the fight. And those are more the pro-style fighters, obviously. But you don't want to rely on that and limit yourself. You want to try to be able to win the fight within whatever the length of fight is, because you will have to fight many lengths of fights as you progress. So, the last thing, though, that scoring system. What's the difference? Clean, effective punches with professional boxing and amateur boxing. It's punches that hit with the knuckle area of the glove in a scoring area. And that little distinction is a massive distinction. And that simply translates to if I'm boxing you and you hit me with one big right hand and drop me in that round, and I come back in that round and throw 10 jabs on you and maybe hit you with the right hand, but I don't drop you, then in amateurs, it's undeniable, like completely undeniable that I won that round. In pros, I lost that round. I got dropped. That's a 10-8 round automatically. And unless I go back and drop you or just literally dominate the hell out of you, which is going to be hard to do with just maybe 10 jabs and a right hand that doesn't rock the crap out of you, I ain't got that round. I got to do a little bit more to get it back. So it's all about clean, effective punches as a pro, and as an amateur, it's more about scoring. All right? Yes, they try to put in this criteria, rightfully so, but then they just need to go back to the definition of hitting with the weight of the body or the snap of the shoulder, things like that. But that's not enough. We need to go back to clean, effective punches, because that will probably prepare guys for going professional, because now it sets them up for a certain mindset in boxing that then translates to some of the issues that we have with boxing. And then also, too, you have guys that come up in that system that go on to be referees, that go on to be judges and officials and professional, and it infiltrates the whole sport, and it's a bad thing. It's a real bad thing. All right, but so how does this translate to your training, though? As an amateur, you can get away a lot more. It's funny, even though it's in the rule set that you need to hit with the knuckle surface area of the glove, because it's not about clean, effective punches, you get away a lot more with just, pop, 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 touch, 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 and a judge sees more action, right? They see more hands going and touching target areas, and it's really subjective to try to tell which is a more, which punch has the weight of the body or the snap of the shoulder. It's kind of subjective. Of course, so is effectiveness as well. But it's even more subjective, I think, to try to judge like how much snap or how much weight of the body does that punch have on it. And so it ends up just being a volume play of, hey, how many punches landed, and that's it. Who landed more punches? And then sometimes, more commonly, which is an issue, who threw more punches? Which, of course, that's an indicator of a winner, but it is not necessarily, right? You can have someone that's very good defensively, that's part of the art of boxing, hit and don't be hit. And they land very effective counters that are more powerful and everything else and more clean. And they do that more than the other person, but the other person output it more volume. And then it kind of it simplifies the sport too much. It makes it like checkers if you score it just based off of the volume as chess, which is what boxing truly is. All right. So with training, we need to make sure that we're practicing how to throw hard, how to throw loose and with power, how to hit the effective areas, like the most effective areas, not just scoring areas, but the most effective areas, pinpointing those areas in the body, how to hit those, how to set those up, how to throw in a manner that's not just simply going to count as an amateur, but going to actually truly inflict the most damage. And then also the strategy of wearing somebody down throughout a fight so that you can either get them out of there or end up with such a tsunami on rounds that you got the fight 100%. A longer game is a different strategy than the shorter game of boxing. All right, guys, those are some general concepts with the difference. I hope Bowie559 that this answered some of your questions for you. Of course, we could go on forever on it. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you click like, subscribe, everything else. Also, my book is out. I've already had quite a few people pick it up. It's on Amazon, so make sure you grab that because it's no bullshit, packed full of actionable strategies and tactics. I did my best to make it as effective as possible. There's also a section at the end of every single chapter where you can take notes because I want you to revisit the book. It's almost like a boxing manual for boxing strategy and tactics. And then also, if you want to work with me, it doesn't matter where you are in the world because I have that custom program where I work with anyone and everyone people who are elite level, people who are complete beginners, or somewhere in between. And we've already had massive success with the different teams I've worked with that. And then the last thing is too, if you want to turn boxing into not only something you do, but something you help other people do by opening a gym. I've opened, let's see, 7 locations, and over my time, 7 different boxing gyms, and scaled them up and everything else, built out coaching staff and all the sales, marketing, systemization, all that stuff. Then also go to the Patreon page for any of this stuff and shoot me a message there because love to see if I can help you a little bit with that as well. And watch out for the next video, guys. See you there.